It's season 2.
Season 2. Woo!
We're especially excited, listeners, for season 2. So for you, we realize it's only been 1 month since the last episode, but for us, it's been a bit longer. So we're very excited to get started with season 2. And so with that, my official intro.
Yes.
Welcome to Diverse Joy, a podcast that infuses science, practical skills, and most of all, joy into diversity discussions. My co-host is the regal Dr. Amber Nelson.
Thank you very much. And my co-host is the roguish Dr. William T.L. Cox.
Yay.
So as you all know, for those of you who have been listening, we always like to start with something that's bringing us joy. So Will, what is bringing you joy these days?
Well, as we're getting this season 2 started, my joy for this episode is everyone's response to the podcast over the last year.
Yep.
So, we hoped people would be really into it. And many people have been.
So cool.
So we were ranked in the top 15% of
That's
all
amazing.
podcasts. We've had over 2,000 downloads already. And when you think about it, we've only had 14 episodes.
Yep.
That's a lot. And counting.
Yeah.
Part of why we developed the podcast is for clients, people who have gotten, the bias habit breaking training to continue doing the work. And there are several workplaces that are actually using this as their monthly diversity activity where they listen and then get together and talk about what we talked about. And so amazing. I think we both have a number of stories we want to share
100%.
related to people's response to the podcast. One thing I want to acknowledge, Eric Roman Binding, our wonderful producer, was learning podcasting, not entirely from scratch because he has a lot of video production work, but was learning a lot. And we actually met a professional podcaster, the really wonderful Wendy Pretty, through a mutual friend. And she's the professional podcast producer of one of our favorite Star Trek podcasts, The Greatest Generation.
That's cool.
And when she met us, she heard that we had a podcast and just kind of volunteered to give Roman some advice.
That's amazing.
And she gave it a listen and then sent him some tips.
Yeah.
But the tips were a bunch of documents that he described as being kind of like a 6-month course on how to really do podcasting well. And so he remastered all the audio and got it up to the highest level quality. And we've gotten several compliments. In fact, you had one.
Yeah, actually, one of my students, which, again, from a reception standpoint, it was really cool because he texted me and screenshotted the podcast. He was like, it's really cool to see your podcast show up in my rotation. And one of his top comments about he's somebody that comes from an IT background and is really into the production stuff. And that was one of his first comments was wow, the sound production is professional.
Yeah.
And so I was our producer is amazing. What can I say?
Yes, he is. And also special thanks to Wendy Pretty.
Yes. So thank you, Wendy. Yes.
What else? Gosh. So lots of people have told us just how useful they've found it. I have a couple of folks who have said that, they listen to it through once to kind of, do the learning and stuff. But then these two friends of mine, each independently, were having a bad time in their lives just for various personal reasons. And I won't, out their personal business. Yeah. But then they said, they would listen to our podcast and hearing us as two friends, two friendly voices, two people they liked, just talking about things, just hearing our voices really cheered them up. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet.
I love that.
I also had, I know I'm going on and on. But
no, that's okay. That's okay. We're just getting back into it. I love it.
There were at least 2 occasions where someone started talking to me and they were telling me something they learned in the podcast, but they forgot that they learned it from
your podcast.
Yeah. So did you hear that, Star Trek, Nichelle Nichols was quitting, but Martin Luther King convinced her to stay. Yeah, and it was right after our episode where I talked about that had come out. And I was it was with Roman, and Roman was like, are you sure you didn't hear that from our podcast?
From us?
And the person was like, oh gosh, I'm explaining to you your own story. But it was beautiful because it means they're
internalizing it.
Yeah. And
that's great.
Oh, so wonderful.
I love that.
Yeah, we had one bad review, but it was a person who clearly didn't even listen to the podcast.
Right. Yeah.
And what they said was, So this is around the time for those of you who are listening. Boeing had a few accidents where like a door fell off the plane, and some idiots on the internet blamed it on their diversity program, like their DEI work.
I didn't realize that was some of the context.
Yeah, someone was like,
gosh.
see, they worked on DEI, so now their planes aren't as good, which is total dumb, not true at all stuff. But our one bad review, someone came on and was like, go get on a Boeing airplane, like see how their DEI stuff is working, your socialist bullcrap. And it was just such a dumb bad review that I couldn't help but be amused. I think diversity is very powerful, but I don't think it blows the doors off planes.
No, right. I mean, it blows people's minds, but doors off planes, I don't think it has that power.
Oh, and that reminds me, everyone out there, all last season, we didn't ask you to leave us 5-star reviews, which is a kind of standard podcasting thing. It helps us a lot if you leave 5-star reviews, recommend the podcast to others, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, please. We also love to hear your comments and your questions, which we ask for questions, and we still want you to bring all your questions so we can just address them and have conversation around them.
Yeah, or topic ideas, or your own stories.
Yeah.
Share your stories with us. And
positive, negative, or otherwise.
Yeah. And maybe we'll share them in story time. We'll of course protect your confidentiality, all that kind of stuff. One last fun thing about people's response to the podcast. A colleague of mine told me she checked out the video version of the podcast. And apparently her cat really likes us. She was like, usually my cat just ignores things on TV screens or my computer screen, but your podcast, my cat was into it and I wanted to watch you.
Just enthralled.
So hi, Chloe's cat. If you're out there watching now.
I love it. Yeah, and if you have never watched us on YouTube or watched us our podcast, maybe you'll be enthralled by watching us too. So, yeah.
All the content is the same in both audio and video, but just added visuals. You get to see our cute outfits.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this podcast has been bringing me joy and people's wonderful responses to it. What's been bringing you joy, Amber? What's your joy this time?
Well, a couple things. First is, also just folks' response to our podcast. It still blows my mind when people like my friends and kind of acquaintances and kind of my extended network come up to me like, oh my gosh, I've been listening to your podcast. I'm like, oh yeah, that's so cool. Thanks. I get a little shy. I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot. I mean, not that I forget, but like, oh yeah, like people listen to that. And so it's been really cool hearing and having people reach out to me through socials or text messaging and just saying like, oh, I'm really enjoying this. I really appreciate the joy that you all are infusing into the work, which is great. And we'll talk more about that. So that's
the joy.
Really
I feel like we should be like Pee-wee's Playhouse. That's the magic word.
So the magic word. Joy. So yeah, that's definitely been something that brings me joy. But specifically this time, my joy is Ren Fair. I finally got to go to my first Ren Fair. We mentioned it last season, which was one of your joys, was going to the Renaissance Fair. And I bought a costume like forever ago and had never been to a Renaissance Fair.
And that's why we're dressed in some Ren Fair outfits today, for those of you who can see us.
Yes.
And even those of you listening, if you look at the episode art for each episode, you'll get to see our outfits. So whenever we mention them, you can see them too.
Yes, absolutely. And so that was just, oh my gosh, it just kind of blew my mind. I don't know that I totally knew what to expect. I had some concept of Renaissance fairs, but this was, what is it? It's the Bristol Renaissance Faire in Bristol, Wisconsin. One of the largest. We were trying to figure out the exact statistic, but it's one of the largest and one of the highest rated. Right. And it's massive. I was not anticipating it being so big. And it just was this, I don't remember if they said like 30 acres or however many acres. 30 acres, yep. And it's just a permanent Renaissance fair. And it was so cool to just like walk around and see all the buildings and all the character, like the people that worked there and the shows. I loved, there was an acrobatic show. They're called Barely Balanced. They were hilarious and so incredibly talented. There was somebody who does a whip.
So that's Adam Crack.
And I can't remember what his Instagram handle is, but we can find that and share it too. But he was amazing. He did like a fire whip cracking show. And he was incredible. There were just acrobats, and there was jousting, and there's archery and crossbow and all kinds of just medieval style carnival and fair activities. And it was amazing.
Yeah.
And it was so much fun.
And the weekend we went, it was a steampunk weekend. So they do a couple of theme weekends during their season. And we saw a steampunk Tinkerbell that was so cool.
Yes, the steampunk Tinkerbell
like
was
she
amazing.
had kind of steampunky wings where the wings were moving based on, what looked like steam-based technology. She was cool.
It was just amazing seeing people's artistry in the outfits that they were wearing, but also just the things that the people were selling too, and the artistry and the garments and the just accessories and different things was just, I can't say enough good things about it. And it's also just a really cool environment, right? Like I was saying this to somebody else. So it's like, it's kind of like when you go to, Disney's one of our other business, one of our other buzzwords, but it's kind of like when you go to Disney and everybody's just like in a good mood, right? Like even though it's hot, and it was very hot.
It was the hottest time I had ever been there, and I've been there like 20 sometimes.
It was very hot. So even though it was hot and crowded, there's people and there's things going on, but people are just in a good mood and they just want to interact and engage with each other. And you see that at Disneyland, but you saw that there too. People just dressed up and just appreciating what other people were wearing.
And Amber is being so modest as she's telling this. When she's talking about people appreciating what others are wearing, every person that saw her was like, "You look amazing, girl." And Roman will put pictures in the video version of the podcast. Yeah. She was in an amazing green and pink Renaissance outfit. And then I kind of matched. So we had cute double photos, which we'll use as some of the promo photos for the podcast. So they'll be out there. You'll see them. Wearing our favorite colors of pink and green.
Our colors, But it was just really cool. And I brought this with a few people. I think when you appreciate what somebody's wearing, this happens at Disneyland, it happened here, was they give you like little trinkets. And so one of them was she gave me like a little bag that I could pick something out of. And I got this little Hermione was one of them. And I got a little marble and a crystal and a few things from people. And it was just, again, it just added to the ambiance and the
nice,
experience.
Generous spirit and environment.
Yeah. So that was, that's something that will continue to bring me joy, I think.
Hooray.
Yes.
Yeah, it was so much fun. So I was so glad that you were able to come and enjoy it and was able to share it with you.
Yes. Yay. Thank you for bringing me. It was amazing.
All right. So those were our joys.
Yes.
What are we talking about today?
Well, and again, speaking of joy, and our topic and our whole podcast is about diverse joy. And really today we wanted to talk more about like, why joy? Why is that so important in what we do and why we did this podcast? We mentioned it before, but we really just wanted to expand on that centering joy and why that's important and where that's coming in.
Yeah. Why joy is important for diversity work. Mm-hmm. And to give our listeners and viewers a little insight into even how we thought of that idea. Mm-hmm. We were kicking around lots of different ideas like diversity science podcast or bias habit breaking podcast they were all right, but none of them really sung. And as we were getting ready for starting our filming our first season, I just kept being excited that you were coming, and I was just feeling that kind of warm joy inside of me, and that just kind of kept running through my head. Just that I was excited to talk to you and have you come visit and all of that, and so then it just kind of smacked me. I was like, wait,
What
like
about?
diverse joy, like
Yeah.
diversity and joy.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
and then I texted it to you and you were busy or something at the time, but when you responded, you were like, oh my gosh,
God,
yes.
it's perfect. Yeah, exactly.
And then we kind of thought through the rest of it. And there really is a scientific basis to what we do, you know, helping people change the behavior, giving them something to approach, something positive is always better than emphasizing something to avoid or something negative.
Right.
And so this kind of joy framing is good from that perspective. And then also, if you want people to learn more stuff and keep learning, if everything they learn is horrible, awful stuff, they don't want to keep doing it. It's like, it makes them sad.
Right.
And so a kind of analogy I had is, you know, for our podcast, you know, joy is the bread of the sandwich, you know, and that doesn't mean there aren't salty things in the sandwich.
Right.
You know, we don't avoid difficult topics. We don't avoid things that are hard because those things are important.
Right.
But by kind of framing it with the bread of joy, with starting off with our joy and ending with our joyful recommendations, and also making sure each thing, even when we're talking about difficult things, we're always tying it to, well, how do we do this better?
Right.
If it's something 100%. That we want to overcome, how do we have those practical skills to overcome it?
Right. I also think like when we have the joy infused, it's part of like building a relationship with diversity, right? So when something negative happens or there are things that we have to talk about that are more difficult, it's predicated on an already established, more positive relationship, which means we can actually hold and handle some of those things, more difficult conversations or difficult topics better because it's being held by the joyful bread.
Absolutely.
Right?
And yeah, this, you know, one of the kind of phrases that kept going through my head as we were thinking about this talk, like, what are we fighting for if not joy?
Right.
Like biases, inequities, the kind of negative things we sometimes talk about, those are all obstacles to joy. Exactly. Like if someone is facing bias in the workplace, that's making them not be as happy at work. Exactly. And, you know, hopefully if someone's pursuing a career that they want to pursue, it's because it brings them some kind of joy. They're doing something that is meaningful to them. Right. And if that's harder for them, that's dampening their joy. Or obstructing their joy. Right. And so I think that, you know, this is what diversity work should be for, helping kind of unleash that 100%. Joy. And, you know, one thing that happens as we started with this podcast, I started seeing other people kind of coming up with this message on their own. Right. So my dear friend Jack recommended that I promote the podcast at this thing that some people call the Big Gay Conference. It's a conference of academic institutions all around the Midwest for LGBT plus folks. And I went to look it up to see like if I could apply to be at that conference and we could promote the podcast there. I was too late. I had missed the conference by just like about a week. But the theme of the conference for that year was queer joy, celebrating queer joy. And I was like, well, that would have been even more perfect if I had gotten there. But I've seen several things like that. There was I just saw an advertisement for a queer joy book club, trans joy events, black joy being a huge thing that some people have centered. So I think a lot of people are kind of resonating with this idea. Although we trademarked diverse joy now, so it's ours. But I think everyone's kind of starting to recognize how sometimes diversity discussions have been so drowning in kind of a slog of negativity. Right. In fact, one person, one quote from someone when they were hearing about our podcast, were like, "Oh, that's a good idea," because people are so tired of the lecture, the 100%. Lecture about diversity, and like infusing joy and making it a positive thing again. Is I just think so important.
100%. And like, you know, there's so many parts to this. And I think that it's just very timely, just coming from a time where we're coming out of just post George Floyd and post the pandemic and all of these things. And we had this influx, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but influx of like focus on DEI work. But part of that focus was on what was so bad, what was happening. And again, we do address that. It is important that we address that. But if we only look at that piece, people then just feel blamed. They feel like they have no way of moving forward. And it feels just negative. And like, there's no hope, right? Like, why am I moving forward? What's the purpose? Because I can't fix the system, right? I can't fix everything. So like, how do I do this? And so it is incredibly important. It's so timely. I know even, and I talked about last season a little bit about my nonprofit, which is For Us Bias. Kinship Coalition is our new name. And our whole thing was about centering Black joy for kids, right? For youth in rural Oregon, when so much of what was being centered was the negative things that were happening around them. And they were always being asked, how they feel about what's going on and all this, and focusing on that, and not about what does it mean to just be able to be happy in your skin and to be around other people. And the more that we were able to, and the more that we are able to center our joy, the easier it is for us to manage, handle, and kind of sojourn or walk through when the hard things do happen.
Oh, and I couldn't agree more. And that actually reminds me of this quote that I found. And I don't know who the quote's from. It was like a meme when I saw it that didn't credit anyone in specific. But it's about healing from trauma. And we often think about biases, inequities, these kind of negative diversity things as it's a form of trauma for the 100%. People who are experiencing it. And it's about healing from that. So the loose quote is, healing from trauma is not about preparing you to survive more trauma. You already know how to do that because you've been through the trauma in the first place. Healing is about preparing you to experience joy again. And then I saw that and I was like, oh yes, that's our podcast too. You being for anyone who's new starting this season, I guess we should have said earlier, I come from a behavioral science background. I'm a scientist practitioner in this realm. I've done a lot of science related to this. And then Amber, her background's as a psychologist, clinical therapist. Like, do you have anything related to this kind of healing from trauma idea from your clinical background? Sorry to put you on the spot if you don't.
No, I mean, I think that, we try to hold it in balance of not necessarily like discounting the trauma or just trying to like not go into toxic positivity of like only like just find what's going to help you move through this. And that we often grow, right? Like there's things like post-traumatic growth and the things that come from those really negative times and spaces. And I think that that's exactly what it is as we heal, it's acknowledging what we've been through and the strength that you had to get through it. Yes. And the healing part is not to discount what you went through, but it is exactly just ushering in a space for you to have joy. Yeah, absolutely. And another part of this is, diversity and diversity kind of related things was always a source of joy for me, even before it was something I worked in. Like being a military brat, growing up, living all over the world, even just all over the US, everywhere I moved, I found that people saw the world in a different way and had different ways of thinking about things, experiencing things. And that was joyful to me to kind of figure out like, oh, wow, it's so interesting that, someone sees this same situation differently than the way I see it. Right. And so like coming to learn about differences and similarities between people was a joyful thing. And again, some of the rhetoric we've had has become some of the rhetoric we've had lately in culture around diversity has just made it such not a joyful thing. And I want to get us back to that. Yep. And, we've been talking about the bias being an obstacle to joy, especially for the people who are the targets of bias, which of course it is. But I also want to think about the members of more powerful groups. Bias is often unintentional. They don't kind of realize they make a misstep. And so it's also an obstacle to their joy because if they want to engage with people who are different from them, with their diversity of colleagues, if they're so worried about bias that they kind of freeze up or don't engage, they're not getting the joy of connecting with different people. Absolutely. And so helping people with these practical skills, these science-based skills that are central to our podcast and to my work in general is really helpful from that perspective too. 100%. Yeah. I mean, again, like you said, it's also those that perpetuate the bias that we're also wanting, like again, the fear, I think there's so much fear in like doing a misstep, or how to recover when we've made a misstep, or all of those things that then people end up kind of retreating and not trying. And again, that steals your joy. It steals your opportunity for interaction. It steals your opportunity to, experience something new and different. And that, again, is just exactly what you said, which is just our hope is that we bring back opportunities and ways in which you can experience this with joy and not fear.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're going to take a brief break, and then we'll be back with story time. So, Amber, you had kind of a topic that kind of relates to the joy theme of today's episode that then related to some stories you have. You want to talk about the topic a little bit first? And I have a response to the idea of the topic, and then we'll hear your stories.
Right. So when we were thinking about stories today, we were thinking about what are stories or things that maybe something happens that kind of steals your joy, right? What are the things that steal our joy? And I actually have two stories that both kind of have a positive and a negative, or a negative and a positive side to them. And really what it's about is there's this term like yucking somebody's yum, right? And I think...
And the idea of yucking someone's yum. Yep. So what it means is your yum, it's something you enjoy.
Something you enjoy.
So maybe it's something nerdy or just something that makes you happy. And then someone else kind of going yuck about it. Like, oh, that's so lame or whatever. And we don't all have to agree about what's enjoyable for us. I like some things that maybe Amber won't like or whatever. But we can respect that. Oh, that's great for you. Like it brings you joy. So hooray. 100%. But there is this kind of thing where people are like, ugh, I don't like that you like that. Right. Yucking other people's yums.
Yucking other people's yums. Yeah. And what does it mean for us to just respect and honor that, man, this is not for me, but I love that for you, right? Yeah. I love that for you. And so often we see people kind of make judgments or even share their opinions about somebody's passion or love or something that they're expressing or the way that they look or the way that they dress. And you can just see the joy, kind of their sparkle just kind of drain from their face. And so one of the stories I was going to talk about was I wasn't exactly a camp counselor, but I was on a mental health team at a camp this summer, which I'll talk more about in an episode coming up. But one of the kids, there's only a few BIPOC kids because this is this camp in Oregon and there's not a whole lot of BIPOC folks, period. And one of the girls, she went swimming, and as black hair does, once you get it wet after it's been pressed, it curled up. And it really got coily, and she didn't really have everything to care for her hair. She had stuff to care for her, don't get me wrong, but not when it's fully in its natural state. And she, there were some kids that made comments about her hair and how it shrunk. And, I don't think that they were trying to be bullying or anything, but they just didn't understand. And you could just see her get so self-conscious. And then she just started wearing her hood around and covering her head and not wanting to come out. And one of her camp counselor was so great and recognized what was going on. And she came and got me, and she was like, can you help her with her hair? Just talk to her. And so we talked, and I got a chance to just braid her hair just in two plaits. And after that, she felt more confident to take her hoodie down. And then she got all of these compliments, and you could just see the joy be restored in her. But even just that, right? How we present ourselves, how we wear our hair, what's going on with our bodies or what we're wearing, and then people start making comments, negative comments about that. You can see it just drain from them.
Yeah, and this also brings up the good specific topic of beauty standards, which is something we're going to talk about later this season. And why is the way that her hair naturally grows out of her head even considered something that people would comment on? It's her natural hair. But because of how culture has constructed these things and how we think about these things and what may be unfamiliar to some of the other kids at the camp who are making those comments, this ends up being the consequence. And again, the robbing of the joy.
Of the joy, 100%.
And we could probably do a whole episode on Black women's hair.
Well, yes.
And I was in this... I forget the exact name of the course, but it was an undergrad and it was a feminism related course. And it was taught by a wonderful Black woman who was really inspired a lot of the work I do. And we read a book called Hair. Have you?
I don't know.
It deals a lot with Black women's relationship with their hair related to kind of societal pressures and things. And it opened my eyes a lot. And it's a really good read.
Yeah, I'll have to read it. There was a documentary by that Chris Rock did a while ago, like 2009, 10, something like that. I think it was also just named Hair, and it was about Black women's hair, and it's a fantastic documentary. But yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah. We could talk about it all day, really.
Yeah, we have room this season. We could work it into an episode if we want to.
I love that.
I don't know. Like I know about the things intellectually, obviously not personally, but I am here to talk.
I can talk about it all day.
I mean, you're usually the one talking about drag queens, which would be considered a gay topic,
right?
Which
it's true.
In theory would be more of mine. But really, you know more about drag queens than I do.
It's true. What can I say?
So we can do it. So yeah, but that story. So usually we do kind of one more negative and one more positive. That had a mix of both. And your second one does as well.
My second one does as well. And I was thinking about a lot of myself growing up, and I was a bit of a theater kid without like a ton of theater because I was in a small town, so there wasn't a lot of opportunities. But I definitely did like community theater, and I was just a really expressive kid.
Wait, what's this past tense?
I know am. Still got the theater kid energy.
I have a brief little interjection, if I may.
Yeah.
So I was at an event, a weekend long like gay thing earlier this year, and someone was. I was also I'm pretty expressive in case people didn't notice yet. And I was talking, and this person came up to me and was like, "Are you in theater?" I was like, nope, I'm not. I am a public speaker. That's kind of my main thing. And I think I probably gave him a card for the podcast.
I love it.
But I was like, when I said I was a public speaker, I was like, okay, that's accounting for this energy.
You're like,
so it's something.
Where is this energy coming from?
Something we have in common.
Yes.
And probably have had for most of our lives.
Yes, it's true. Yeah, so I've always been very expressive. And, I just like am somebody that like likes to play, and I would be out and about and just kind of like singing in the grocery stores or like dancing around and things like that. And I remember growing up and my mom would feel really uncomfortable and would kind of like poo on it, and we like shh, like kind of quiet, like, what are you doing? And would say things to me. And so I would just kind of like, okay. And it was very hard for me to like hold myself back. And I would try. Wasn't very good at holding myself back.
A form of this sapping your joy.
Yes, kind of draining my joy out of like, going to the grocery store and listening to the music and singing and dancing along with it. And, but years, not that long ago, but like a while ago, my mom came to me and she was like, Amber, I really want to talk to you about something. And I was like, okay, is everything okay? Like, what's going on? She said, I just really want to apologize to you.
Auntie Nanette.
I know. Aww. She's like, I just really want to apologize to you. I realized that, like, I used to just tell you to be small, to be quiet when we were out and to do those things. And she said, it was really about me. It was about my own insecurity. I didn't want people to be looking at me, but that drained that joy from you.
Aww.
And she was like, I just really want to apologize. It had nothing to do with you. And I recognize that like, this is late, but like, I want to acknowledge that. And
Auntie really Nanette, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
For the listeners who don't know, her mom's name's Nanette. And Roman and I got to meet her. And she encouraged us to call her our auntie. So Auntie Nanette. Oh, that's so sweet. But that's something that the positive side of that I think a lot of people of our generation are kind of reconciling with their parents in different ways for things back in the 80s and 90s that were different, and we see things differently now. And this something I want to share that just occurred to me. So early in the first season, I talked about my parents throwing me out for being gay, and I didn't tell the second part of that story, which is all the years of us reconciling since then. So it took a while. It was a process. But now we're at the point where my parents, love and accept me. They love and accept Roman. They treat Roman like they're another one of their sons, and they've said that to him many times and love him a lot. And it's in a much more positive place now. So this kind of reconciling, reinfusing the joy that was maybe sapped from something is such a good thing. So I'm so glad. Thank you, Auntie Nanette.
Yes,
she's probably listening.
Mom. Yes, she absolutely is listening.
So it's great. So anything else on that, or did you want to?
Yeah, no, I think, those
do we have a question?
We do have a question. Again, just a reminder that send in your questions. We love sitting with them and answering them and talking about them.
Go to diversejoy.com, send them in. We are so happy that so many of you have already. And it gives us joy just to see that you have questions 100%. And want us to address
and
them.
Engage with us. Yeah.
So please keep sending them in. And so we have one today.
Absolutely.
What is it, Amber?
So I'm going to read it here. So this is a really, really good question. And again, really timely. So given the Supreme Court affirmative action decision and the movement towards defunding DEI, how do you stay encouraged and motivated in this climate? Many DEI practitioners are exhausted and calling it quits. So how do these individuals stay the course in an environment of unrelenting pushback?
Thank you.
So good.
So for our listeners, any new listeners, because I think some people might start with the season beginning with season 2.
Yeah.
So DEI stands for diversity, equity, inclusion.
Right.
I think most people know that. We also like an alternate version of it, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or JEDI.
JEDI.
So you'll hear us talk about JEDI work sometimes. But yeah, how do we stay motivated for that? Great question. It's something I think about a lot because there are a lot of movements and things out there. There's the Boeing comment I mentioned earlier where it's people being negative about this kind of work. There's a great quote from Toni Morrison that resonated with me for this question. And what she said is, I get angry about things, then go on and work. So when negative things happen, it's a correct emotional reaction to be angry about something. But then, anger, you want to use it to motivate something positive. So motivate you to work harder. So when these things happen, it just shows me that there's a need for this kind of stuff. And so I try to use that to motivate me. And I want to acknowledge the question asker's kind of sentiment that when this stuff happens, there is that feeling sometimes of oh gosh, this awful stuff is happening. So our joy focus is one way to get at that, to think about the joy. And just say look, this work is needed. And I think people out there, people want to be inspired to do positive things related to JEDI work. And so for my work, I focus on that. I'm every time I go and give a training to an organization, there are people in the audience who thank me afterwards. And they're this really gives me actionable steps to move forward. It's part of what's important about the kind of skill basis of this kind of work and why we focus on practical skills in this podcast and in this other work our organization does. And I really just trying to focus on the core of what I do. And really what we do is about helping people. 100%. We're helping people be better, helping people find that joy in diversity, overcome those obstacles to joy and so on. So when I really focus on that, the people who want help to overcome their own biases or help addressing biases in their institutions, that motivates me. And I keep in mind those people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I 100% agree. I also think that it can be really hard when you are in the system, right? And because then that's where you really feel the unrelenting piece of it. And finding these, for me personally, has been about thinking about not necessarily my end goal or whatever the end goal is, which is always it's always shifting and changing, right? There is no finish line. And so instead of thinking about where should we be, quote unquote, if we should on ourselves, which you should never should on yourself. But if we think about just where we need to be, where I want us to be, it can feel like it's a never ending goal, like we're never going to reach it. But if you think about successive approximations, like what are the small goals, small steps? What are the small successes that we've made? What are the small movements that we've made? And being able to praise and see those as monumental steps towards progress makes a really big difference. Because again, if you look at like how far we have to go versus what we have done to this point, it's gonna always feel like detrimental. It's always gonna feel heavy and like a really heavy burden. But if you can really amplify the progress that has been made, that really makes a difference.
And this is just repeating something you said in a slightly different way. Think about what's within your control.
100%.
And not. So Supreme Court decisions, unless you're a lawyer who that is your business, right? Like it's not going to be within your control, even if you're upset about them or whatever. What is within your realm?
100%.
Your own behavior is always within or always can be within your own control. You can focus on that, how you treat other people, things 100%. You do in your organization. You can focus on those things you have control over, because things you don't have control over, well, you don't have control over.
Absolutely.
If you're getting depressed about diversity things, listen to our podcast.
Exactly.
Hopefully we'll bring you some joy.
Absolutely. And thinking about what's in your control. So a couple of years ago, I wrote a piece for Psychology Today about like catching one's breath in the age of I can't breathe.
Oh yes, I remember that.
And I talk about like how do we take care of ourselves? How do we stay well in the midst of so much going on? And one of those things, I have this acronym called SAFETY, and I won't go through the whole acronym, but one of the parts of that is one, tending to your whole essence, but also engaging in those things that you can control. What are things that I can control that I know I can make progress in, right? Like I might not be able to control what's happening with the Supreme Court or affirmative action or all of these things, but I can create a nonprofit for working with Black youth. I can do these other things in these other spaces where I can have some control and where I can make some progress. What does it look like in my work, in my world, that I can control and making some progress so that it brings me some joy and recognition that movement can happen, even in a small way, and not to diminish that small steps and small changes add up to monumental changes. It's like that. It's like the quote that's like, what is it? I might not make a difference in the world, but I can make a world of difference.
Aww,
right?
That's beautiful.
And so like I can make a world of difference for myself or for one or two or a small group of people, even if it's not changing the world, it's changing my world, and it can be changing the world of somebody else.
And I think also look to your talents. So it doesn't matter what your talents are, what things you are that you're good at. You'll be able to use that in some way. So Eric Roman, our producer, long ago, before there was a podcast, before he did all this wonderful work for our nonprofit, Inequity Agents of Change, learn more at biashabit.com. But before all of that, he's a photographer. He has 2 master's degrees in photography, and a big gender bias, sexism related thing happens. And what he did, so he's a photographer, he offered free professional photos for any women in the world, any women who wanted it. And he posted on social medias, and lots of our friends who are working with, they need good headshots for various things. And he did that for free as a way to kind of empower and lift up women. Really cool. Think about your talent. What are the things you're good at? What are your gifts to the world? Are you, whether it's art or working with kids or whatever, there's probably something that uplifts diverse joy. And I don't mean the podcast, I mean the concept of joy for, also share the podcast. But like maybe it's mentoring people in your field. Maybe it's reaching out to more diverse people who can showcase their talents with yours, or like you can find those things that are in your power and control. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And again, those are the things that help us stay motivated and help us stay focusing on the joy, focusing on the passion. And, the other thing I really want to mention is that you do have to care for yourself in that too. Right. And like that, when it feels unrelenting, it's also okay to take a step back, right? And not to keep pushing in, because then you will burn out. you can burn out. And so being able to have that ebb and flow where you can kind of take a step back and break and breathe and tend to yourself and then re-engage, that's a natural progression of what activism looks like on big and small levels, that you have to tend to yourself in the midst of it, and being okay with saying like, I'm taking a step back, I'm reevaluating, I'm centering, taking care of myself, and then re-engaging and giving yourself the space for that. Because again, in unrelenting spaces, you can receive a lot of harm in just pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. So knowing when and listening to your own self and your own body of like, okay, I need to take a step back for a bit and kind of heal and be prepared to then re-engage, that's good, that's natural, and that's healthy too.
And what that reminds me of also, again, this is maybe just reframing what you said, but, back to the joy idea, when you're doing your work and you start finding it to be joyless, when you're working really hard at something and you're losing the joy in the work you're doing, maybe that's the sign to step back, recenter, what is joyful about the work. Or, we all have different tasks. There's some things you have to get done. And there's some things that bring you more joy in your work, whether it's related to diversity, JEDI kind of work, or just the photography like Eric Roman, or whatever your job is. When you find yourself losing the joy, step back and maybe do some of the tasks that bring you more joy, to remind yourself what makes you passionate about what it is you do.
Absolutely. Or even things that are like small. I do these groups on secondary stress, or like secondary trauma. And I even talk about like finding those moments of breather, like a breather throughout the day, right? Especially when you're in a space that is a lot all of the time, of something small. Like I will wear fun glasses frames, or I'll have different things that can give me a mental break, right? Like of just like kind of a reminder to recenter something that is core to me. Or
so you just go and look in the mirror for a while.
Look in the mirror, like just like touch my frames or something like that, or like how I'm dressed, or those things that can infuse those moments of joy, whether it's related to my passion or not, but it's related to something that gives me that.
And it's also that the message we were talking about, what's within your control and not within your control, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So absolutely. Great.
Yep.
All right. So we're going to take a little break and then come back with our skill.
Excellent. All right. So welcome back. So one of the things, again, if you're new to the podcast, that we always do is we infuse bits and pieces of the skills from your habit breaking training. So what is our skill today?
Yeah. So since this is the first episode of a new season, and, I always want, I don't want people to feel like they have to go back and listen to all our episodes.
Beginning.
Although they're pretty great. So you should, just because it's fun. But also with like workplaces using it, I want to be able to say to workplaces, well, you can start at the start of a new season. So kind of a foundational skill is this kind of habit model. Yeah. And I also want to assure our longtime listeners, whenever we revisit something we've talked about before, Amber and I have agreed, what we do is we look back at the time we talked about that topic before and make sure we're talking about it differently, using different stories or what have you. So it's not going to be repetitive for those of you who have listened from the beginning or are listening from the beginning. But so the core for how we change biases and inequities, how to work on things in a positive way, is something called the habit model. Came from my PhD advisor many years ago. Basically, we want to approach biases, stereotypes, those kinds of things as habits of mind. And then our model for how to change those things is to think about breaking those habits. And so there are kind of a few core pieces of what's involved in breaking a habit. So if you want to change a habit, first you have to be motivated. Motivation is the first necessary condition. It has to be something you personally care about. Nothing happens unless you decide you want to make a change. So you need to have motivation to break a habit. Then you need awareness. You need to understand how that habit plays out, what its potential consequences are. For biases, there are things that we're not always aware of. And so this awareness component, many of the skills we cover in this podcast are going to focus on helping us to tune in to these often unintentional kinds of bias, becoming aware of what they feel like, what they look like, so that we can disrupt them. So motivation, awareness. Then you need tools. You need concrete, actionable steps that you can take to start changing those habits of mind or habits of behavior. And that's another big skill area we focus on, kind of mental exercises that help reduce bias or interpersonal things that can help elevate joy and so on. So motivation, awareness, tools, and then you have to put in effort over time. We've learned these biases, habits, stereotypes over many, many years of our lives. And for our brains, they're these kind of automatic unintentional things now. And so we have to work at it and put in that effort over time to make meaningful change, actually use the tools and skills that we're learning. And there are a couple of nice things about this model. One nice thing about this model is that, as we go out in the world, we often discover new kinds of bias we weren't previously aware of. Right. And as a society starts tuning into things like, oh, that might be kind of an offensive way to phrase something. Right. Or, oh gosh, this reflects kind of historical, colonial kinds of biases. Right. It's something we're going to talk about next episode. And so you can always come back to these core steps to think through, what do I need to do to make a change related to this? And I have a personal example that I like to share. A habit that I had, kind of a verbal habit I had for most of my life, is when referring to a group of people, I would use the phrase "you guys." So like I'd be talking to a bunch of my students back when I used to teach, and I'd be like, "Hey you guys, open your textbooks to whatever page or so on," regardless of the kind of gender makeup of the group. So guys kind of implies that everyone's male, but I would use that as my kind of generic catch-all phrase. Right. And I had a friend, she pointed out to me, like, she didn't really kind of like that phrase because it wasn't inclusive and all of that. And also for her specifically, when she was growing up, she was kind of a tomboy and she sometimes got bullied for that. And one of the ways people would bully her, sometimes they'd say things like, "Oh, you're not a girl, you're a guy." And so whenever she was in a group and someone referred to that group as "you guys," she'd kind of have a little pang of like, "Oh, is this person trying to make fun of me? Is this person, trying to bully me?" And it would make her not feel good. Yep. So I thought about it. I was like, yeah, as someone who does this kind of JEDI work professionally, I want to be as inclusive as possible in my language. And also very specifically for that friend, or maybe other people who had specific experiences, I don't want to diminish them or make them feel bad. So I decided this is a verbal habit I want to change. I want to stop saying "you guys." Yeah. So I was motivated. That's that motivation component. I decided for myself, this is something I want to change in my behavior. Yep. Then I needed to become aware of it. And I was very aware that this is something I did all the time. It was my default verbal habit. But also, I especially did it with students because that's often when I'm talking to a group of people. And so becoming aware that was a special place where I did that a lot helped me, because when I entered that kind of context, my classroom or working with my research assistants in my lab, I could be extra vigilant to watch out for that phrase. So that's part of that awareness. Yeah. Then I needed some kind of tool, something else to say to take the place of that habit. And one of the tools that we've emphasized before, and we'll probably revisit again, is just working on rehearsing a different response. And so instead of saying "you guys," I started saying "you all" or "y'all." And that's also something that I kind of examined within myself. There were times in my life maybe I used to say "y'all" because I lived in the South. Yeah. But then people would kind of react negatively to it, like, "Oh, you're from the South," or make fun of me for it. And so I worked that out of my language. And I was like, you know what? Well, that was their bias, their problem. Thinking, I'm not just from the South, but also that was a big part of my job. Anyway, but so my tool, motivation awareness tools, the tool was to practice rehearsing a different response. And so I started saying "you all" or "y'all."
I had a very similar. So I think that it's a colloquialism, right? So most people, a lot of folks use "you guys." And that was something that I used to use all the time, similarly, mostly with students. And I actually had a friend of mine, and I'll just shout her out, Dr. Kelly Blunt. And she was somebody who really would very intentionally not only just correct her language, but speak it out loud. So if she said "you guys" or "you," something like that, she would specifically say, "Excuse me, that was gendered language. I meant y'all." And so I really adopted that. And then that was it also gave me that opportunity that if it offended somebody or that it missed somebody, that I also was apologizing for it. I was saying it out loud and I was correcting it, which then internalizes, it allows me to internalize analyze it more and more and more, not just fix it in the moment, but I'm also apologizing and I'm saying, I'm naming why I've shifted my language.
Beautiful.
And I learned that that specific language I got from her. And so I still say, or if I say something else, I'll say, explicitly say, excuse me, that was this language. I meant this.
Oh, and that's perfect. And that gets to our last component, that effort over time. For any of these things we're changing, they're not just going to change because we snapped our fingers. It's, I would slip up and I would say, you guys, I'm like, excuse me, I mean you all.
Yeah.
Exactly like you're describing. And also something that I really like in how you describe that I was also going to emphasize is you're talking about your own behavior. You're not saying, oh, you're a naughty person for saying, like, it's like, oh, I want to have gender inclusive language. Right. This is why I'm doing it.
Right.
You said this, but again, just repeating your wonderful things. That also sends a feedback signal to yourself. Right. So it actually makes it easier over time. Exactly. When you correct yourself and do it out loud, what you're hearing from your own mouth is reinforced in your brain. Yep. And so you can see how that motivation, awareness, tools, and effort kind of play out in that example. Now, that being said, everything that we talk about when we use examples, when we share stories, they're just that. They're examples. And they're also about decisions that we've made for our own behavior or the people in our stories have made about their own behavior. They're not necessarily prescriptive. Right. And the you guys example, I think, is perfect for that. There's some people who hear that and they're like, well, really? Is that really that big a deal? And actually, it has different levels of impact in different contexts. We are not dictating your language or anyone's language except our own. That was a decision I made for myself to stop saying you guys. Same. I am not judging you if you say you guys. And the context thing is important here. So in science contexts, I've given this training, the bias habit breaking training, and used that example in many with over 100 audiences by now, and had interesting conversations with each of them. In science context, I think a lot of women really respond to that example as like, yes, we want to root that kind of bias out of language because, most areas of science have been historically very male, and then women have kind of broken into them. And then when people refer to everyone as you guys, that's kind of a constant little piece of bias that makes them feel like people think they don't belong.
Right. I imagine that's helpful for non-binary and two-spirit folks as well.
Absolutely. It's also, yes, thank you. Yes. So anyone who's not male. Right. And so, in science context, people really resonate with this. But there's also a counterpoint. So I've also done our training with police officers a lot. And in that context, women have said that women who have talked to me about it, at least, have said they feel very differently about it. So for them, there's the process of kind of going through basic training as officers, which they do with the men. And they have to, pass all the physical training tests and things like that. And they kind of frame that as a process of quote unquote becoming one of the guys. And so for them, when someone says you guys and it includes them, they see that as a signal to inclusion. They see that as you are one of us, you belong here. And it's a positive thing. And so I would never prescribe to everyone, oh, don't say that anymore. I would kind of rob them of what they see as a signal to inclusion. 100%. And I think it's just such a perfect example of everything we do with these skills. We're using examples to teach you these skills. It's the skills we want you to learn, not that we're dictating you do say some words and don't say. It's a personal decision.
100%. And we'll talk a little bit about this in the next episode around colonization, but it's also stopping and questioning, like, what's the utility of this for me in this moment, right? Around that specific language, not necessarily the skill itself, but like, again, the prescription of, well, don't say you guys because that's gendered and you can never use that. But just saying like, hey, how do we sit and question this thing and say like, where and when and how and why do I use this rather than just saying like a carte blanche, no.
Yeah. So we always invite you to consider, like maybe it would apply well for you. Maybe it won't. But it's never, this kind of prescription. Absolutely. It's always suggestions, skills, and for your consideration. You're responsible for your own behavior, and 100%. You're an autonomous wonderful person.
Yes.
And we aren't trying to impinge upon that.
Yeah. Well, and again, just to reaffirm, part of why we do Diverse Joy is bringing that joy back in. And I think oftentimes some of those like less helpful diversity trainings and conversations is very prescriptive of like, this is how you do it. This is what you have to say or don't say, and kind of give you a set of rules of how to behave. And we're not doing that. What we're wanting to do is give you skills and allow you and empower you to contextualize it in your own spaces and what for you and how this works for you.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the, like this, if you want to learn more about kind of quote unquote bad, or at least not as effective diversity trainings. Our first episode, we talked a lot about that. But the point is there are a lot of diversity trainings. They aren't science-based. They haven't been scientifically tested. Everything we do is built on the framework of this bias habit breaking training, which is scientifically tested and carefully crafted. But like someone once told me about this kind of bad diversity training they had. They said, you're not allowed to say, and they had a whole list of phrases, which just is just never a good way to approach things. But one of them was like, you're not allowed to say huddle up. So like to have people kind of gather in a meeting, let's huddle up and talk about that because it's related to sports, and sports is a male thing, so it's exclusionary to women. And I mean, I am open to considering that myself, but like the way this person was describing it was just such a finger wagging, naughty sort of thing. And I'm like, well, there's also kind of an assumption built into there that women don't like sports, and that men do, like all men do. And it was very fraught, I think. And I think consider that, maybe consider 100%. Your language. If women in the workplace or whoever in the workplace is saying, oh, that makes me feel excluded, then you should take that seriously. I've never heard, no one's ever come to me and mentioned that. Like, in all the hundreds of times I've given this training with hundreds of audiences, I've never heard someone bring that up as an example of something that made them feel excluded. But I'm open to considering it. But it's just this, don't have an approach of wagging the finger or telling people what's naughty about their language. Start with yourself and your own behavior and sharing how you apply these things. 100%. And it's for others to decide their own behavior, not us.
Yep. Yeah. 100%. Well, in light of thinking about suggestions, or again, we're giving suggestions to you based on our skills and other things, but also we like to give you all just some fun recommendations as well. And Will, I think you have our recommendation for today.
Yes. So finishing out this episode with our joyful recommendation. So this is always something in some kind of media, something that brings us joy. The primary thing is that we think it's fun to watch or listen or whatever the kind of media is. And then maybe secondarily, it has a bit of exposure to different ideas or something like that. But primarily something that brought us joy that we hope will bring you joy as well. So my recommendation for this episode is a Star Wars TV show called The Acolyte. So it's if you're listening to this episode when it comes out, it's been something that's been airing over this summer. And when this episode comes out, it'll be just after the season finale. Which I'm very excited for. And I think Amber is too. I just
got introduced to it, and it is incredible. And I think, honestly, even if you're not a Star Wars fan, you would really enjoy the premise of the story. And it's dramatic and just really good storytelling.
Yeah. Actually, the creator, Leslie Headland, she specifically made sure that one of the writers in the writer's room didn't have any familiarity with Star Wars going into it, so that the story could kind of stand on its own two legs without all that history as well. Although it does, if you're into Star Wars, it has things that tie to Star Wars lore. But it's really great. So the creator, she identifies as a gay woman, which it's always great to support media from historically underrepresented groups. And one other thing that we want to say about it is there's also some toxic fans who are kind of against the show in a way that involves kind of, I think, bias. There's this group of kind of toxic fans who we think who basically didn't like the show because it features characters of color and women. Most of the main staff cast characters fall into those categories. And it's one thing. So this is kind of the yucking your yum sort of thing. It's one thing to just not like something. Like that's okay. It doesn't have to be for everyone. But some of these toxic fans kind of went after the show and like got bots on the internet to kind of review bomb the show. And so some journalists have kind of proven that no, this isn't real people. These are bots that are hurting the reviews of the show. But if you look at actual reviewers, like professional reviewers, there's very, very positive reviews. The statistics for like how many people are watching it are very, very high. One of the highest Disney's ever had for a Star Wars show. And so it's this yucking someone's yum thing. Absolutely. And if you don't like a show or even this show, that's fine. Don't watch it. I don't think it makes you a bad person if you just don't happen to like this. But the kind of going after the show, this review bombing and toxicity, to me, it just stings of racism, sexism, anti-gay kind of stuff. It's not really a quote unquote gay show, but there are lesbian characters in it, just exist and live their lives, and being part of the interesting intrigue and stuff. And the
recognition of like the world,
like even in this,
queer people exist in the world.
And the hostility towards it, I can only say that it does have to relate to these kinds of hateful, biasy sort of things. And so bad toxic fan people, but luckily it seems the majority of people actually watching
really enjoying it.
Are really enjoying it. It's such a good show.
It really truly is fantastic. And like I said, my brother and I were watching, I don't know, something on TV, and we saw the preview or the trailer for Acolyte, and he's not necessarily a Star Wars fan, and he was like, "Oh, I might have to watch this." And now that I've seen it, I'll definitely tell him that he has to watch it because I think he will totally enjoy it. And it is really neat. And we'll talk again about representation and media and things like that. But it is very cool to see a show have so much incorporation and diversity in the cast without it making it the focus of the plot, right? Like it's just folks existing in their bodies and in how they live their life. And it not being the whole premise of the story is not about that.
Like the main character being black, like it's Star Wars, so it's not like they're going to be talking about racism in the United States context, but just her living her life and feeling her emotions empathetically and so on. Like it does good things for us. Also related to that, so one of my friends who we watched this with, hi Mark, my friend Mark, we have a kind of weekly thing where we watch it, and we've been watching it with him from the start. And Roman and I mentioned the kind of toxic fandom at one point. He was like, "Wait, what are they toxic about?" And he's a straight white man. And he was like, and we pointed out to him, well, the cast is basically all people of color and women, and not any white men kind of as the focus. And he hadn't even noticed that. So he hadn't been following the toxic fandom. He'd been watching the show with us every week, loving it. He's like, oh gosh, I didn't even notice that it was mostly people of color. That's cool. Like, and that goes to what you were saying. Like, it's just a good show. It's just a good show. Great action, great intrigue and mystery. And I think, someone who's not coming at it with that toxic, slant doesn't even notice. They just enjoy the show. So couldn't recommend it more highly.
It's fantastic.
And by the time you're listening to this, you'll be able to binge the whole 8-episode season. And so I hope they make more. I love this creator, Leslie Headland. Thanks for doing such a great job with representation and just with this awesome Star Wars cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So with that, I'm Dr. William Cox.
And I'm Dr. Amber Nelson.
Diverse Joy is produced by Eric Roman Beining, with music by Jay Arner. It is accessible as a video podcast on YouTube or an audio-only podcast wherever you get podcasts, or at diversejoy.com. You can also follow us at Diverse Joy on most social media platforms. If you enjoy the show, help us reach more people by leaving 5-star reviews or recommending it personally. Diverse Joy is the official podcast of Inequity Agents of Change, a nonprofit devoted to evidence-based approaches to reduce bias, create inclusion, and promote equity. All that good Jedi work. Learn more at biashabit.com. Thank you for joining us. Now, go find your joy.
Bye.
Bye.